Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unlock a hidden world inside a biblical passage you probably think you know. And trust me, it might just change how you see everything. For a lot of us, passages like this from the book of Ephesians they're like a warm blanket. They're a source of deep personal comfort, right? A real wellspring of reassurance about where we stand with God. Yeah, traditionally, we read the first chapter of Ephesians almost like a greatest hits album of personal salvation. It's like a checklist of spiritual benefits, all for you. You're chosen, you're forgiven, you're adopted, you're secure. It's this incredibly powerful message, but it's all focused on the individual's inner life. Okay, but what if that's not the whole story? What if this isn't really about private comfort, but it's actually a battle plan for a cosmic war? Now let's just dive right into this, because the original text, when you really look at it through the eyes of its author, well, it suggests a story that is way bigger, way stranger, and honestly a lot more dramatic than what most of us were ever taught. So where do we start? Well, the first clue to this whole hidden story is a single repeated phrase. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It changes everything. And that phrase is this Greek one, in tois epuranios. Now that translates to in the heavenly places. This little phrase pops up 5 times in this one letter, and according to the scholars we're looking at, it is the master key to unlocking the Apostle Paul's entire worldview. It's that important. Now this is absolutely crucial. When Paul says heavenly places, he does not mean some distant, cloudy heaven where we go when we die. No, what he's describing is a parallel spiritual dimension that exists right here, right now, overlapping and directly interacting with our world. You can almost think of it like the command center of the cosmos. And this is where you really see the difference, right? On one hand, you have the common idea of heaven, a peaceful, far-off, future destination. But for Paul, the heavenly places are the complete opposite. They are the current, active battlefield for a cosmic conflict, and they are populated with both loyal and rebellious spiritual powers. It's an active war zone, not a retirement home.
And here's the thing. This wasn't some brand new idea Paul just came up with. Not at all. He was pulling directly from well-known Old Testament concepts. Things like the divine council, this heavenly court you see in places like Job and Psalm 82. Or think about those wild stories in Daniel 10, where a powerful spiritual prince of Persia is literally fighting against God's messenger. So for his original audience, this idea of a populated, structured, and contested spiritual world, that was just normal.
Okay, so that leads to a really obvious question, right? If this whole cosmic worldview is so central to the text, how in the world did we lose it? How did it get almost completely replaced by this much more individualized personal reading? Well, it wasn't one single event. It was more like a slow fade, a series of historical shifts over centuries that gradually flattened out this supernatural worldview. First, Greek philosophy comes along and makes the divine all abstract and impersonal. Then you get allegorical interpretation, which starts treating these huge supernatural events as just symbols for our inner spiritual life. A few centuries later, a massively influential thinker, Augustine, reinterprets key passages to be about humans, not spiritual beings. And then, bam, the Reformation and the Enlightenment come along and put all the focus on individual salvation and what's rational, pushing this whole robust supernatural world to the very fringes of the conversation.
So what was the end result of this long, slow process? Well, the text was basically stripped of its original cosmic and political context. Each one of those steps we just saw moved the focus further and further away from a cosmic conflict and more toward the inner life of the individual believer.
All right, so now let's get to the really exciting part. Let's put on those ancient worldview glasses and see how it completely transforms the meaning of those familiar personal blessings we talked about at the beginning. Okay, let's start with adoption. We usually read that as this really comforting metaphor for God's fatherly love, right? And it is. But in this cosmic framework, it's also a deeply political act. It's a transfer of jurisdiction. It's about God reclaiming people from nations that were ruled by hostile spiritual powers and placing them into his family and under his authority structure. It's a kingdom move. And what about redemption? We tend to think of it as just the forgiveness of our personal sins, solving a kind of legal problem with God. But in this cosmic view, it's so much more. It's about liberation. It's the decisive blow in a cosmic war that frees humanity from the dominion of those rival spiritual authorities that held them captive. It's breaking the chains, not just clearing a debt. And inheritance gets a really radical makeover. Seriously. It stops being about us going to heaven when we die. Instead, in this worldview, believers are God's inheritance. We are the people he is reclaiming from all the nations, and it points to a future responsibility to share in Christ's rule over renewed creation. And get this, even judging the rebellious powers. It's not passive, it's active.
And this is the end game. This is the ultimate goal of the entire project. It's not just about saving individual souls so they can go to a distant heaven. No, the plan is to bring the heavenly and earthly realms, the entire cosmos, back into perfect harmony under one rightful king, Jesus Christ.
So what? What's the big takeaway from all of this? Why does recovering this lost world actually matter? Why does it change more than just how we read one little passage? Because it fundamentally reframes the entire story we thought we knew. The gospel shifts from being primarily a private blessing list, a solution to my personal problems, to being a public declaration of God's victory in a cosmic war. The focus moves from me and my salvation to God's grand, sweeping plan to reclaim all of creation. It's a huge shift in perspective, right? The story goes from being personal to cosmic. It goes from being psychological to political, in the sense of kingdoms and authority. And the ultimate goal shifts from just achieving inner peace to participating in a cosmic victory. And what this really means is that the Christian life gets totally recast. It's not just about being a forgiven individual, working on your own personal devotion anymore. It becomes about being an active participant, a soldier, an ambassador in this grand cosmic project to restore heaven and earth to their rightful ruler. And that really leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought, doesn't it? If putting on this ancient lens can so dramatically transform one familiar chapter, what other lost worlds are just sitting there, waiting for us to discover them, right there in the text?